we're going to hear about the history of Godzilla in comics. Without further ado, here we are.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Dierendorf. I run a blog called Mazer Patrol, and I frequently do presentations at conventions where I have way too much material to cover in the time allotted, so we'll have to make this quick. It turns out there's a lot of Godzilla comics. So just as a quick constraint here, we're going to talk about the American comics. There's an entire manga industry in Japan that's huge, and that's a topic for another day, much in the same way that I previously covered all the Kaiju comics that aren't Godzilla and said Godzilla comics are a topic for another day. Well, today is that day, so let's talk about some American Godzilla comics. So while in Japan, manga adaptations were hitting immediately as soon as the franchise started. Before the very first Godzilla movie came out, there were already adaptations of Godzilla on the shelves. And in America, it took a little while. It really wasn't until after the end of the Showa era movies in Japan that we started getting American adaptations. But the difference is it started really outpacing the American releases started really outpacing the Japanese releases. And this is just a look at American Godzilla comic releases over time and how incredibly wild it's been just in the past decade or so. You know, as an old fogey, I tend to think of Godzilla comics as the Marvel and Dark Horse runs, which are the red and green bars here. And then we have this IDW run that started in 2011 that's the yellow bars, and it's taking up like 70% of the new comics. And you'll notice 2023 had more Godzilla comics than any other year, and then 2024 doubled it, and 2025 is going to double that. So it's pretty overwhelming at this point. The first comic that was released was actually an adaptation of a Godzilla movie. Unlike most of the stories which are original, this was a 4-page freebie comic that was put out by Cinema Shares to promote the US release of Godzilla vs. Megalon. This is an interesting one because they don't use the names Jet Jaguar or Gigan. They call them Robot Man and Borodon. This is a hard one to get the original edition of, but it was reprinted in GFan later. So that's the very first release, but when people talk about Godzilla comics in the 70s, most people talk about the run from Marvel, which ran for 2 years, 24 issues, 1977 to 1979. Marvel was really a trailblazer when it came to Japanese content. They were partnering in Japan to make manga adaptations of their characters, to make live-action adaptations of their characters in Japan, and they were also bringing in characters from Japan, and that's how we wind up with things like, you know, Shogun Warriors and Transformers, etc., etc. In the States is largely through Marvel's input. There was a meeting at Marvel Comics where a bunch of suits from Toho came over and were very solemnly showing Godzilla vs. Gigan, and the Marvel writers were sitting around thinking, well, what are we going to do with this? And then Stan Lee was in the corner going, go get him, Godzi! So it sounded like absolute pandemonium. But basically, it landed on this creative team of writer Doug Mensch and artist Herb Trimpe. Trimpe is one of the go-to Incredible Hulk artists. If you're a Marvel fan, you would know his work. And this is still like the most widely distributed Godzilla comic, even though it's 50 years old now, because it was sold in drugstores, in convenience stores, etc., etc. They did about 200,000 issues per 200,000 copies per issue, which is an order of magnitude over the best-selling Godzilla comics nowadays. So you can still find actually some of these old 70s comics easier than you can find some of the newer ones. This was just recently reprinted in color for the first time. They had a black and white reissue, but now it's all available in one solid hardcover. So about these comics, Godzilla was brought over to the Marvel Universe, but Toho only wanted to license Godzilla. They didn't want to license any of the other kaiju. So it's really Godzilla and a bunch of original creators, original creations, as well as classic Marvel characters. So you have Godzilla go up against the Champions, against the Fantastic Four, against the Avengers. And if you're a fan of Devil Dinosaur, yes. So like people know Devil Dinosaur nowadays for Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Originally, Devil Dinosaur was in his own self-contained universe where he was with Moon Boy, and his first crossover with a main Marvel character was Godzilla. So there's actually a lot of interesting legacy of this Godzilla run because it is in the main Marvel universe, and the ramifications kind of linger there. So you have characters like Dr. Demonicus and Red Ronin that are introduced in this Godzilla run that persist in the Marvel universe and still occasionally show up from time to time, as well as influences on the Godzilla brand. You know, Godzilla shows up in the Shogun Warriors toy line because of his involvement with the Marvel comics. You get things like the official Godzilla logo from Toho was actually the Marvel Comics logo that was used on the issues. They just repurposed it, as well as this iconic Godzilla title logo, which is like Godzilla written in like breaking cracked stone. That was done for the Marvel Comics and then just became the signature for the brand for decades afterwards. You see many, many variations on it where Godzilla is used again and again and again. As well as that first issue's art by Chimpy is lampooned all over the place. Recently, there was a bag clip that did it in super deformed style. That art was used again on the Godzilla audio plays that were released in the U.S. And was actually in one of the later Godzilla comics parodied by Matt Frank in Godzilla Rulers of Earth here. Now, basically, Marvel loses the rights after 2 years because Toho doubles what they want to charge for the rights to Godzilla, but that doesn't stop Marvel from using Godzilla. Over the years since, they have used plausibly deniable Godzilla in a number of different issues, such as Iron Man here, where this mutated Godzilla shows up. This character isn't called Godzilla, he's called My Old Adversary by Dr. Demonicus, who famously went up against Godzilla, and you kind of like read between the lines. Shows up again in a Demonicus story in X-Men. And then there have been a couple times where they got a little too close and they had to go back and change the art because it was reading a little too close to the Godzilla work. So you can see in Spider-Man and Avengers here where they changed the illustrations. Then more recently in 2024, when they did these reprints, they really wanted to promote it, and they did a series of variant covers with Godzilla going up against different Marvel characters. 21 total variant covers. I'm sure this confused people who pick up a comic with Godzilla on the cover and then it's not actually a Godzilla comic. But this was different kind of what-if scenarios, including, you know, what if the Venom symbiote took over Godzilla? That would be crazy, right? Yeah, so following that, there was a series that's currently coming out called Godzilla vs. Marvel, and basically this is a bunch of one-shots, so you can technically read them in any order, but Godzilla faces off against Fantastic Four, Hulk, Spider-Man, Avengers, and Thor, and each one of them is like Godzilla vs. Fantastic Four, issue number 1, Godzilla vs. Spider-Man, issue number 1. But this actually does a whole lot of interesting crossovers. So you have like, what if Godzilla got the power cosmic of the Silver Surfer? What if Godzilla got Hulk's gamma radiation upgrade? What if Godzilla got the Venom symbiote? So you do get kind of remixes of a lot of Godzilla, as well as the other Toho monsters for the first time that are brought into the Marvel universe. So this is a fun mini-series that's going on and is leading to more things. I also want to just point out Takashi Okazaki of Afro Samurai did a variant cover for this. So this is actually the first time a Japanese artist has worked on an American Godzilla comic. So as I mentioned, Godzilla is continuing at Marvel after that first miniseries. There's going to be something called Godzilla Destroys the Marvel Universe. It's coming out in July, so I can't really comment on it too much. But Destroys the Marvel Universe tends to be a very catchy phrase. They've done similar things with like Deadpool against the Marvel Universe, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good gimmick to have one character go up against a whole bunch of other characters. And it looks like it could be fun. So that's Marvel. As I mentioned before, they were kind of the big only game in town for a couple decades, going through the 70s, based on that first run. But then we get to the Dark Horse run, and this is very sporadic in that you have a couple of specials here and there, and you have one big run of 17 issues in the mid-90s. But this is kind of a little bit of a different situation and a little bit of a similar situation in that basically what happened is Randy Stradley was the co-founder of Dark Horse. He was a huge Godzilla fan, and he really just wanted to work with this property. Dark Horse was very young at the time when it licensed Godzilla. It had only really been around for a year, so this was their first licensed project, and they really went all out with it and got some really great artists to work on it, including Stephen Bissett of Swamp Thing. Art Adams is kind of one of the definitive Godzilla artists now, thanks to the work that he did on this run, et cetera, et cetera. Bob Eggleton, also another go-to artist. It's mostly set in the Dark Horse universe, but not as explicitly as the Marvel comics were, because the Dark Horse universe itself wasn't very well established. So overall, this is about Godzilla going up against G-Force, who are this basically Fantastic Four-like group led by Dr. Kagaku. Kagaku is the Japanese word for science, so they're very clever there. And they don't have superpowers, but it is a kind of a task force of people that is assigned to monitor Godzilla's various adventures. It unfortunately does end in a cliffhanger, though, so I wish they had been able to continue it and figure out what the next adventures would have been for them. Dark Horse is unfortunately, these are my favorite Godzilla comics. I'm wearing a shirt from it right now, but it's hard to get your hands on them. They're from the 90s. A lot of them are hard to find. There's been a color reprint in Japan that has had 1 volume so far, and that are black and white reprints in the US. But the black and white reprints are sometimes missing things like sound effects because they were printed in color, and those color sound effects don't come over when it's printed in black and white. So maybe your best bet is to look for people who might have preserved it digitally through one mean or another. Wink, wink. So, as I mentioned before, Dark Horse introduces this Team G-Force, and this is before Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 introduces the Team G-Force. And it's very evident that people at Toho were consuming these Godzilla comics, if nothing else to approve them, look them over. But there are things like the Godzilla Color Special has an insert that was included on the scripts for Godzilla vs. Destroya when that was being filmed. And the movie Mothra 3, actually the plot is taken from Bob Eggleton's issue number 16 of the Godzilla comic, where Godzilla goes back in time and fights a space monster that's killing all the dinosaurs, and be like, well, that is exactly the plot of Mothra 3. But if you're a fan of more recent Godzilla comics, you'll also see stunning parallels when you're going through the Dark Horse run. Because you have things like in Godzilla Legends, there's a story about a guy in a suit trying to climb up Godzilla's hide and then fighting the parasites on it along the way, and that's a story that Dark Horse did. And Dark Horse had a whole time travel arc where Godzilla fights the Spanish Armada and goes to ancient Rome, and these are also things that have shown up again in the IDW run. So I don't know if there's some creative inspiration going on here, or if great minds just think alike across the dozens and dozens and dozens of different Godzilla stories. Sometimes similar ideas come up. So that was the general run of the main issues, but they had a couple of side specials as well. So one of them was Godzilla vs. Hero Zero. Hero Zero was a character that was introduced for Comics Greatest World, which was kind of the combined Dark Horse universe. He's an Ultraman knockoff, basically. But it made sense for him to fight Godzilla in a special. And this special is set at San Diego Comic-Con, so you get a bunch of comic cameos and things like that. Art Adams, for example, shows up as a character in it. This is actually the end of Hero Zero's story arc as a character, because he meets Godzilla, fights him, and decides he doesn't want to be a superhero anymore. This isn't the most famous of the Godzilla crossovers from Dark Horse, though, because we have to go back a couple years to 1993. There was an ad campaign, a series of posters for Nike, and then also a short film that was done for television for Godzilla versus Barkley, and of course it was adapted into a comic book. It expands the story a lot. You know, in the ad, Charles Barkley just shows up out of nowhere, giant size, and this gives a very reasonable explanation that the reason why he's giant size is because of magic. And this comic has never been reprinted, I'm assuming due to rights issues with Nike and Charles Barkley, and it's credited to Alan Smithy. So if you know filmmaking terms, Alan Smithy is usually a term that people will put on a project if they don't want to be acknowledged and want no acknowledgement for it. Dark Horse also ran the manga adaptation of Return of Godzilla from the 80s. This was the very first manga that Dark Horse ever released. So their entire legacy, this 40 years, when you go to Barnes & Noble and pick up a brick that says Berserk on it, you can thank Godzilla for getting them in the door in this manga industry. This ran for 6 issues, which basically is the same as one Japanese tankobon, but the covers were all different from the Japanese releases, and in fact this is also Bob Eggleton's first Godzilla artwork was doing the cover for this collection. This was later re-released in 1998 to coincide with the 1998 Godzilla movie in a colorized version, which also cuts out a couple of pages because they're kind of graphic. So again, this is a difficult one to recommend, but at least the Japanese presentation in black and white was collected into a book twice, actually. So it's a little easier to find in its original format than you can find the rest of the Dark Horse comics. And it's interesting. This is basically the only Godzilla manga that's been released in English back in the 80s. So it's one of the first manga ever released in English, and also the only Godzilla manga that's ever been released in English. Unless you want to count Gunhead, which was based on a concept for a Godzilla movie that was then adapted into something that was not a Godzilla movie and got a manga release that was released in English ahead of the movie's release over here. One last thing from the Dark Horse run before we move out of it, and this was actually not originally printed by Dark Horse, this was printed by a different company, is a short story, it's a 4-page short called Trampling Tokyo. This is the lyrics to a song that was written by Alan Moore, so the creator of things like Watchmen, wrote this song that was then illustrated by Art Adams and has been reprinted in Art Adams' book, Art Adams Creature Features, and this is available colorized in that version, although if you want to see the original black and white art, you still have to reach out for that original issue of Negative Burns from 1994. The title Trampling Tokyo was actually, fun fact, the inspiration for the website Stomp Tokyo, which if you're, again, an old person that remembers reading about B-movies on the internet a whole lot, Stomp Tokyo was one of the go-to sites for that kind of information. So Dark Horse wasn't the only company that was releasing Godzilla comics in the 90s. We also got Trendmasters. They had, most famously, their series of cards. So when you bought a Godzilla figure, it would come with a card, unless you got one of the big Godzilla figures, in which case it would come with a comic book. And this comic was a 16-page one-shot. It was all in black and white, but it was the same artist that worked on the cards. And it was basically the line of the 6 main characters from the Dark Horse comics, from the Trendmasters figures, all battling against each other. So this is the first time you get all of those characters showing up in an American comic. If you remember, before this, the only characters were Godzilla, Megalon, Robot Man, and Borodon. So now you have more Toho characters showing up in comics in the West. Now, we have one more title to talk about in the 90s. This is the Fox Kids comics. Basically, Fox Kids magazines had a couple of shorts with Godzilla the series. One was an adaptation of the Monster Wars storyline. One was an original story. These are very short, so there's not a whole lot to talk about, but if you're a completionist, they're worth checking out, especially because Godzilla the series is so good. So that was the end of it for a decade. We entered this empty decade where we don't have any Godzilla comics until we get to IDW. IDW has really been knocking it out of the park. If you remember that graph that I showed earlier, 60% of the titles that we're going to talk about today are from IDW. They revolutionized the comics presentation here quite a bit. They're the first ones to write for a trade paperback as opposed to writing individual issues. They're the first ones to be very good about releasing trade paperbacks as opposed to just kind of Dark Horse would print things in individual issues and then maybe collect them or maybe not. They were really heavily leaning into variant covers, which for collectors can be quite the chore if you're trying to get every single alternate cover for something, because every single issue has multiple variant covers. And they're the first ones to release multiple titles at the same time. So you can be following one Godzilla comic and go to the store and pick up another Godzilla comic that's released the same week or the week after or something like that. That's a completely different story. So people who like different stories can be following them, or if you're a completionist, you can be reading all of them concurrently. And because they didn't work through Saperstein like Marvel did or like Dark Horse did, they had access to the entire roster of Toho monsters. So they were able to really bring across basically the main guys that you think about when it comes to Godzilla monsters, your Mothra, King Ghidorah, Rodan, etc., etc. So they really start off in 2011 with Kingdom of Monsters by Eric Powell, the artist of The Goon. And Eric Powell he wrote The Goon. And if you don't know The Goon, it's a very sarcastic, very subversive, very snarky, irreverent kind of comic. And that's exactly what he did with Godzilla. And people weren't really happy with that, including the people at Toho, and he kept having to dial back his plans. He had different ideas for the way that he wanted the trajectory of the comics to go. He was somebody who wanted to do things that were very dark, very lampooning of contemporary life, taking a chuckle at a lot of the tropes that you see in the kaiju genre as well, and that didn't play well with Toho. Toho doesn't like that. So this comic basically got retooled after 8 issues. Powell left, and they kind of had to do a little bit of damage control in terms of restoring it. But because this was the first, and also they did this crazy variant cover promotion where any comic book store could, if they bought enough issues, get their comic being destroyed by Godzilla on the cover, they sold more copies than anything outside of the Marvel run, and that they sold like 70,000 copies of that first issue, which was a crazy high number for comics at that time. So Kingdom of Monsters was promptly followed up by a series called Godzilla, which is going to be a little confusing because we'll, talk about 3 different series that are just called Godzilla during this time. But in collection, this is called Godzilla History's Greatest Monster. So if you're looking for a collection of this, I would say look for the one that's labeled History's Greatest Monster. This is a 13-issue series, and it basically continues the story from Kingdom of Monsters, but it takes it much more into an action movie context. The main character feels like Jason Statham. He's like, I got my crew, I'm going to take revenge on the monsters, blah, 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 blah. You expect him to kick Godzilla in the face or something. This is also notable because it has the first depiction of a gay character in any Godzilla media, as far as I can tell. And that, one of the issues opens with this character's wedding. And that's another thing that I have noticed a lot in the IDW run, particularly, that there is better queer representation in this run of comics than you get anywhere in the franchise. So from that, we move on to Rulers of Earth, and this is the last part of that early IDW continuity trilogy, because Rulers of Earth follows the story from the Godzilla, or whatever the other title was for it. And this was done by Chris Mowry with art by Matt Frank and Jeff Zorno, who's here at the convention. And basically, this gets really much more into kind of any fan's dream what if battle. What if Godzilla fought with the Gargantuas? What if Godzilla fought the American Godzilla? What if Manda shows up? And it's very much a constant barrage of different character mashups and battles. You also get the very first original characters in terms of monsters showing up in this run, as well as you have different alien factions that are battling against each other, as well as a big finale where the monsters all team up against this army of invading kind of cockroach-like aliens. So this is the longest run of comics that has been done for Godzilla, and that they went out of their way to make this go one issue farther than the Marvel run did, and they were always on the verge of cancellation, but they managed to hold steadily in the numbers and managed to get this all out there. Now, if you have all of the American issues, there's also a bonus story that's available in Japan in the collections from Phase 6, but hasn't been released in the States so far. The Phase 6 releases also have some updated art, so hopefully eventually those make their way over here. That would be fantastic. So that was their kind of ongoing series, but they also are really big into mini-series at IDW, so they have all sorts of releases that are kind of short collections. So you have Gangsters and Goliaths, which is actually a Mothra story. It's about this guy that's like on the run from the mob, and he decides that the best way to protect himself is to go kidnap the Mothra fairies and make Mothra do his bidding. That works out great. You have Legends, which is an anthology where you have a whole bunch of different artists taking up, they pick a different character and they say like Matt Frank is like, I'm going to do a story about Anguirus and so on and so forth. And this is kind of lays the groundwork for what became Godzilla Rivals a bit later. Which is a much longer running series than this. Half Century War, I think, is a high watermark for Godzilla comics in the US. This is by James Stokoe of Orkstein, and this basically just tells the story of one soldier going from the first time Godzilla appears to the modern day. Each issue is basically its own decade, and you see the evolution of culture and the world that he's living in, as well as the monsters that he's fighting and the kinds of stories that are in it. So like there's the original story, which is much more just like the 50s Godzilla movie, and then later there's aliens and so on and so forth as it goes up through the series. And the artwork is fantastic, the storytelling is fantastic. This is the one, if you have to pick one, I would say check out Half Century War. Cataclysm is by Cullen Bunn of the Sixth Gun, and this is a post-apocalyptic story. So this is set after monsters have already taken over the world and survivors are having to deal with it. The story heavily features Biollante, so if you're a fan of Biollante, it's one worth checking out. I'm going to blitz through a lot because we only have 20 minutes left and I have so many comics to cover. There's been so many comics, guys. Godzilla in Hell. This is a wild, wild anthology. You had basically, again, it's 5 issues. Each issue has a different artist that they're telling their story. They're loosely connected, but also each artist is kind of doing their own thing. James Stokoe does the first issue, which has, I think, some of the greatest art and some of the wildest creature designs. But you also have things like Godzilla turning into a bunch of eyeball demons and things like that. It's Jeff Zorno again did a variant cover for this that's inspired by EC Comics and has like a Devilman homage on it. So I'm sure you can buy that in the dealer's room. Oblivion is a series about monsters that are coming in from other dimensions. I gotta say I like this one. I apologize if you're a big fan of Oblivion. If you are, you're the first person I've met that is a big fan of it, so let me know you exist. Rage Across Time is another miniseries with different artists working on different issues. This time it's kaiju in different eras. So you have a story set in ancient Japan, for an example, a story in ancient Greece where Godzilla fights gods, things like that. This is very similar to the story that was done in the Dark Horse run, but in this case they don't really give a complicated time travel explanation. It's just these monsters exist in these time periods, which is something that IDW will revisit later. Now at this point, sales are starting to slack on these comics. They're not doing as well, and they go on hiatus. And for a couple of years, it seems like IDW is out of the Godzilla game until they come roaring back with this young adult series called Godzilla Monsters and Protectors, and this is aimed at a middle grade set. So this is 2 5-issue miniseries, and then they have a special that wraps it all up. This is an interesting one for me because it's set in Japan at a school for Americans. So you have all of the American kids doing their American things, talking about football and podcasting and things like that Japanese kids don't do. But it's still set in Japan, which I found an interesting compromise in terms of keeping Godzilla with its Japanese roots, but also appealing to an American child demographic. So with that being successful, IDW basically went full steam ahead, and you got more and more comics over the subsequent years. So Godzilla Rivals is a series of one-shots where each issue is about a different monster. Again, it's much like Godzilla Legends, but this went for 4 collected volumes, and it started as a 50th anniversary project for Hedera. They just did a 50th anniversary special for Hedera, and then they just did another issue for a different monster, et cetera, and before you know it, you had 16 different issues. These don't have any continuity between them. They were actually released out of order from when they were planned, and it doesn't matter. But some of the stories are really good, some of them are a little bit more mixed, but it's, like all anthologies, an interesting grab bag. So we mentioned time travel, Godzilla monsters showing up in different eras. This gets followed up on with Godzilla Here There Be Dragons. So this is a series of 2 miniseries, followed kind of by a third one, where monsters have always existed on Earth. So Godzilla's not created by the nuclear weapons or anything like that, but there's a conspiracy so that nobody is allowed to know that the monsters exist on Earth. So you have stories about like the Spanish Armada fighting Godzilla, but then this kind of cabal of shady figures will come in and cover it all up. And it gets into crazy things in terms of, what if the reason why Thomas Jefferson did the Louisiana Purchase is because there's kaiju out there, and things like that, which is actually fun because, fun fact, Thomas Jefferson actually was looking for woolly mammoths in the Louisiana Purchase, so he was actually a cryptozoologist. So if you're a history buff, things like that might be kind of fun to go through. So this actually was nominated for a Best Limited Series Eisner. So Eisners are the big awards for comic books, so it seems like it's one of the series that is very well received in the comics community. So possibly one of the good ones to check out. So this had 2 different series, Here There Be Dragons and Here There Be Dragons, Sons of the Dragons. And then most recently, Here There Be Aliens. And this one is set in the 50s about an invasion by the Zillions, and is currently coming out. So you can go over to the comic book store and pick that up right now. More recently, we have War for Humanity. This is a series about a kind of plant-like monster called Zoospora that is brainwashing different kaiju. This one is divisive. The artwork looks like an old Mad magazine, so if you like that kind of artwork, it's great. If it's a little off-putting, I can understand why that would be off-putting for some people. This is also the series that took the longest to come out because there was nearly like a year in between the first issue and the last issue. More recently than that, we've had a Valentine's Day special. This is a one-shot about a love story between a kaiju researcher and a military officer, and this one is unfortunately not collected anywhere. So the problem with some of these one-shots is that they will come out there and they don't show up in a trade later, so it's always best practice to buy every comic as it comes out, and I know that sounds terribly irresponsible, and I apologize. Since then, we've also had the 70th anniversary special. This is an anthology. This is absolutely fantastic. Lots of great artists doing original short stories to whatever kind of ideas that they have to do about Godzilla. So you have stories that are very kind of humorous. You have stories that are very kind of somber. It's the whole spectrum to cover Godzilla's 70th anniversary. Sorry, I did a Freudian slip because it was Mechagodzilla's 50th anniversary the same year. And he also got a one-shot. This isn't an anthology. This is just a story about an investigator who is looking over the entire history of Mechagodzilla and the different iterations that he shows up in from decade to decade. This one is unfortunately not available in a trade paperback, but you can buy it digitally if you're looking for it. Godzilla Skate or Die is a series about a number of Australian kind of punk skater kids that get embroiled in a fight between Godzilla and Varan. So if you've ever wanted to see a Godzilla Varan movie, this is probably the closest that you'll get. This is a very, very Australian series, so there's lots of location names and lingo that if you're not familiar with the accent, it could be sometimes a challenge to follow it all. But it definitely feels like a personal story by the artist because the Louis Joyce is an Australian person. Next we get to Monster Island Summer Camp. This is a graphic novel, so sometimes comics are called graphic novels when they are actually just comics. Comics are like the floppy issues. Sometimes you put them together into something called a trade paperback. If it's originally a story that's printed as a book, then it's a graphic novel. So this is, I think, the first Godzilla graphic novel for real. And this is, again, one of those things that's aimed at middle grade kids. So it's about a trio of girls who are at summer camp, and there are suspicious things going on, and their counselors, in order to cover up those suspicious things, say, we don't care what you do, go investigate, be precocious children, and foil all of our plans. And the kids meet Minilla, the son of Godzilla, who hasn't really played much of a role in the comics up until this point. So this is one that, you know, if you have kids that would be interested in this kind of stuff, along with Monsters and Protectors, this would be one of the ones that you might give to kids. Crazy crossover is Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater. This is one that when it was announced, everyone said collectively, what? It's like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in that this is set in the 1920s, and it's Godzilla versus various public domain figures, including Sherlock Holmes, The Great Gatsby, The Time Machinist, Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Mummy. So it's got an Art Deco style. It's very reminiscent of artwork from the 1920s and has all of these literary figures. If you are a fan of those literary figures, you might get more out of it than if you are not, but it's definitely a start of a kind of wild run of crossovers that Godzilla's had in comics recently. Godzilla Heist, more recently than that. This is just recently completed, I believe, or maybe it's still coming out. This is people doing a heist like Ocean's 11 style during a Godzilla attack. This is basically the same premise as Aftershocks comics series Kaiju Score, so there's a little bit of similarity between those as well. Godzilla vs. America is coming out now. This is a series of anthologies, so each issue is like Godzilla versus Chicago. Here's a bunch of stories about Godzilla in Chicago. Godzilla versus Los Angeles. Here's a bunch of stories of Godzilla in Los Angeles. I think it's a shame that we didn't have any about Godzilla attacking a kaiju convention, but we don't have a Godzilla versus New York yet, so you know we'll see what happens. Mothra had her own series thanks to Matt Frank and Sophie Campbell. This is a time travel story in which the world has been destroyed and Mothra has died, so twins meet up with the Mothra fairies and decide to go back in time and fix things. This has absolutely gorgeous art thanks to Matt Frank doing his kind of Copic marker work rather than the digital coloring that you normally get in comics. So, and if you're a Mothra fan, a Mothra completist, it does have a new form of Mothra. There's also a Mecha Mothra. I know that's something that people have been clamoring for a while, so keep your eyes out. And that brings us to, most recently, there was a free comic book day just last month. There was a preview for something called Godzilla the New Heroes, and this was a series of previews for upcoming Godzilla comics in something called the Kaisei era. So IDW is basically rebooting their Godzilla line, and they're saying, we're going to have continuity that's shared between multiple titles, so characters and events that are in one will show up in another one. This is something that you see in comic books a lot, but hasn't been present in the Godzilla comics so far. Each title has been relatively self-contained. Now we're going to have three comics, Godzilla, this is the third time it's been just called Godzilla, Godzilla Escape the Dead Zone, and Starship Godzilla. Basically, Tim Seeley is overseeing the main line, and the side stories, you have one that's set with a kaiju human hybrid character that's in a kind of quarantine zone, and then you have another one with a team that's piloting Kiryu out in deep space. Really kind of crazy ideas that they're going for, so I'm very curious to see where these go out for. But there's one I haven't mentioned yet, because this is a collaboration. This was IDW and Boom teaming up for Godzilla versus Power Rangers. This is an idea that people have wanted to see for a long time, and Toho wasn't really wild about it for a long time, but eventually they saw the sales and they said, okay, we can do that. This has 2 series written by Cullen Bunn of Godzilla Cataclysm that we mentioned before. Basically, Toho was very concerned about like doing a Super Sentai style thing, because Toei is a different company and they're rivals, yada yada yada. But they said no, this is Power Rangers, this is completely different. And eventually they said, okay, we can do this. The first miniseries is basically just the characters fighting each other. The second one, that's where the sweet stuff is, because you get Rangers that are based on the Kaiju, and Zords that are based on the Kaiju, and enemies that are based on the Kaiju, and these kind of cool fusions. So that's the secret sauce on that front. So that is all those IDW comics. But we're not done! My goodness. We still have Godzilla vs. Cthulhu. This was a collaboration with the tabletop game Cthulhu Death May Die. Godzilla fighting Lovecraft monsters is something that has been wanting to do for a long time, but unfortunately hasn't really happened broadly yet. This comic was only available at San Diego Comic-Con last year, so most people haven't gotten a chance to see it. We'll see if it gets distributed any more widely. And then Godzilla also teamed up with Kong to battle the Justice League lately. So Godzilla's been part of the Dark Horse continuity, part of the Marvel continuity, and now part of the DC continuity. This is a very fun series. You see things like a special Lex Luthor, Mechagodzilla, King Kong gets Green Lantern powers. There's a giant Batman mecha that Jim Lee designed by accident, not knowing that the script called for it later. So this is, I'm glad to see this finally happen, because Godzilla fighting Batman is something that's been on the docket since the 1960s, and finally has manifested. So we got one series, there's a second one that's due to come out soon. As well as variant covers to promote that. If you're a guy that collects everything, then you'll see that there are covers for like Green Lantern and Batman, etc., that have Godzilla and Kong on them, even though those aren't those stories. Basically, they're doing the exact thing that Marvel did earlier that we talked about. That's legendary, but there are countless other legendary stories as well. We've had a series of graphic novels for the MonsterVerse coming out over the past, basically the history. Every time the MonsterVerse movie comes out, there's some kind of tie-in. Starting with Godzilla Awakening. These stories tend to not follow the best continuity with the movies themselves as things go along, but kind of squint and don't worry about it. This is interesting. It introduces the character of Lee Shaw, who then later is played by Kurt Russell in Monarch. So Awakening gets to promote the 2014 Godzilla. Then we had Aftershock, which was a tie-in to Godzilla King of the Monsters. This one was a little bit controversial because there's some art that looked like it was traced from Monster Arts photos. We got to Dominion. Dominion and Kingdom Kong were released in conjunction with each other as tie-ins for GVK, and this had this one was written by Greg Keyes, who did the novelizations for the MonsterVerse things. All right. Okay, so almost done, I promise. Fight or Flight, this was a short thing that was done for the MonsterVerse Compendium. Hunted is a New Empire thing that has basically a big game hunter and a giant robot going into the Hollow Earth to fight. And more recently than that, we have had an anthology for MonsterVerse Declassified, which is short stories about all of the different monsters in the MonsterVerse. Again, very similar to what we had seen with the IDW work. MonsterVerse, Monarch: The Lost Adventures is a tie-in to the TV series. That one was just greenlit on Kickstarter. It was a little bit touch and go there. I was a interested to see what would have happened if it didn't get its funding through Kickstarter, because all of these they've been doing through Kickstarter recently, and that can be a dodgy prospect. They said that if they don't make their Kickstarter goals, then they don't make the comic, and I'd be curious to see what would happen in that case. But so far, they've made all of them. They've also done a bunch of Kong comics for the MonsterVerse. We won't go into here because we're very short on time. But if you, like me, aren't just content with the comics, you can also get merchandise for a lot of these comics tie-ins, including the Justice League McFarlane figures that tie in for Godzilla and Kong. The Raymond Toys Marvel Godzilla, which they call the Green Monster for copyright reasons, and the Godzilla vs. Power Rangers bag clip collections, which I believe you can still get at Hot Topic. So on that note, I think we're running out of time, but if you have questions, I know this was a whole lot to talk about, and we'll get to it. Hey.
Regarding Kingdom of Monsters,
Yep.
you mentioned that what we got was significantly lighter than was significantly lighter than what the author originally intended.
Yes.
But considering how weird and cynical and stupidly edgy Kingdom of Monsters is, like, how do you think it would have been if they had actually let the writer continue to write it?
I think it would have been even more cynical and edgy than it was otherwise.
It is also a quick reference, though. This is the comic that said the new. It's basically this old man yells at Cloud in the comic.
Yes. Yeah.
It basically says, we deserve to get destroyed by a kaiju because kids these days are on their phones and Lady Gaga exists.
Yeah.
I am not exaggerating. It is like arguably the worst comic Godzilla's ever had.
It's not great. Yeah. I would be curious to see what his entire vision was, but it was definitely not within the purview of what anybody at the company was willing to put up with.
Do you have a personal favorite? I know you mentioned that Godzilla Goes to Hell is your favorite IDW one. Do you have a personal favorite out of all of them?
I have to go with the Dark Horse run. I think that the Godzilla Color Special is an absolute masterpiece, and I really love the 17-issue run that they did right after that. So.
Somebody that owns a lot of them, but not all of them, I just, the general populace group, the Rulers of the Earth is really fun. I recommend that. The Power Rangers versus Godzilla, that was awesome. He said that as well. And what was the third one? That's all I can say.
When it comes to the Godzilla vs. Marvel or Godzilla vs. DC, especially when looking at everything with Marvel going back all the way into the 60s, 70s, do you see that coming to theaters first, or would you rather see DC beat Marvel to it?
In terms
I
of,
can imagine us not getting a movie at this point, maybe for the 75th anniversary. Who knows?
I would be very surprised if we saw something along those lines, but between those two, I guess it might be more feasible for something like a DC crossover because of the MonsterVerse's connections to Warner Brothers, but I wouldn't hold my breath on either of those crossovers happening on a big screen. Maybe like a direct-to-video animated movie. All right, well, thanks everyone. I'll be around.